So, how can you tell if you are not making progress? It's one of those things where, especially if you're a beginner, you may not even really know what kinds of metrics you should be focusing on. Like how am I even sure that I'm making progress? How am I sure that I'm not making progress? It's tough because beginners, they don't really have a good sense of what metrics they should be focusing on. One of the sort of benefits of being a coach for over 10 years now is that, I get a good sense of what kinds of things people, don't tend to know simply based on the kinds of things that they ask me a lot of questions about. And that gives me a lot of really good ideas for content. That gives me really great ideas for how I can make stuff that is as helpful to as many people as possible. So today's video is going to talk about what should you do if you feel like you're not seeing progress in terms of your strength goals, in terms of your physique goals, and so on. When the reality is very often that you are making progress, you're putting in the work, you are making progress, but you simply don't know how to measure that progress. And that is the much bigger problem. And that becomes, of course, something where it is going to discourage you. It is going to make you think, because you're not making progress, that you should quit, when the reality is that you are in fact making progress and you should be keeping at it. This was in fact inspired by a recent conversation with a client who felt that they weren't progressing, and I was having a little rant. And so I realized, hey, I should make a video out of this. I should share this information with the world. Anytime I end up getting on a little bit of a nerdy rant about something, that is typically a pretty good sign that it is something that I should be filming for everybody to see. As always, do not hesitate to smash that like button, help level up the channel, help bless all Himbos around the world with uninterrupted progress forever. As always, I'm also generally taking on new online fitness coaching clients. So if you are interested, don't hesitate to reach out via the link below, and I will be in touch with you pretty soon. So how can you measure progress? One of the big problems is simply that there are so many different ways to measure things, and people tend to hyper-focus on maybe just one metric or just a handful of metrics over kind of looking at the bigger picture, or on looking at metrics that are more likely to be giving a good indicator of their chances of success, or just basically how well they are doing. The really classic one, of course, is just the amount of weight, your body weight on the scale, which is of course a number, and that's kind of cool. It's a very objective number. It is something that is easy to measure. At the same time, it is very likely to be very inaccurate for a lot of reasons, and it is likely to be very discouraging. It can fluctuate pretty wildly based on stuff that you don't have any control over. It may not be a good marker of basically, what kinds of progress you're making towards a physique goal, towards a strength goal. And so very often that is a very one-sided way of measuring progress that is going to do more harm than good. So how can we measure physique changes? Again, you can look at a scale, you can look at your weight to get a sense of, just how much your body weight is changing, what kinds of tissue changes you are seeing. But very realistically, that is not going to be very meaningful for most people. It's just a number on a scale. You don't have any emotional connection to it. It's not going to feel good over time as that number changes. However, if you step in front of a mirror and you look at a mirror, very often you can see those actual physical changes on your body, and that can be very much, pretty empowering for people. These changes, however, are pretty relative. And so while it can be something where, you might look at yourself a few months down the line and say, oh yeah, I can really tell that, basically the way that my body looks has changed quite a bit. That is something that very often is going to happen very slowly. It's going to happen in little percentage points at a time over a long period of time, and you are the person living in that body. And chances are that you're looking at yourself in the mirror every single day. And so very often what you can kind of do is get into a position where you convince yourself that nothing is changing, which is to say that, you are, seeing just these tiny, tiny little changes add up over time. And so, each day, each week, whatever the case is, you might say, I don't really look that much different than I did last week, so therefore I must not be changing. So that can be something where it may be a good idea to get regular pictures. Get yourself a picture of your progress every week or so, every month or so, and then over time just compare those pictures. See how your physique is changing, see how your appearance is changing. That can give you a good way of getting an objective measurement while still relying on a very subjective measurement that is, of course, very emotionally tied. So those visual changes are something that you will have a lot of connection to and that you will feel, are a pretty good indicator of progress. Clothes are another great metric that is a lot more objective. So obviously, if you have been wearing a particular, pair of trousers, if you've been wearing a particular shirt, those don't change over time, right? Like those are going to stay the same size forever because you purchased them at a specific size. They're going to stay at that size. And so that's something where, if you've noticed that your shirts are fitting differently, if you notice that your trousers are fitting differently, then you can say to yourself, well, clearly I have changed. I've gotten leaner here, or I've built some more mass here. Maybe, these don't fit around my thighs the way they used to because I've built a lot of quad size. Maybe my shoulders have gotten bigger. You can kind of measure yourself against your clothes because your clothes are an objective measurement. And your clothes are basically just a stand-in for a measuring tape at the end of the day. So if you have, a 32-inch waist and you have a 32-inch pair of trousers, then, you can sort of measure your relative changes over time relative to how those trousers fit you. You can get a sense of what is going on there. And then lastly, of course, there are tape measurements. It costs, $1 to get yourself a tape measure. It is, really simple to find a tailor's tape. They sell them in a lot of stores. You can find them online. And all you have to do is take regular measurements. Again, once a week, once a month, whatever the case is. Take measurements periodically, waist measurements, arm measurements, thigh measurements, basically anything that you want to track, just take those regular measurements. And then over time, you can start to, see those trends, see how that's changing, see, where you're building muscle mass or, where you're losing fat and so on. And that can give you a really good sense of what is actually going on with your body, how your body is actually changing physique-wise. Next one is strength changes. So obviously strength changes can be kind of easy to measure depending on what kind of strength we're talking about. So if you are somebody who is training, as a powerlifter, someone who's training with big barbell lifts, then, that can be pretty easy because you can take a regular max test. So, basically just doing as many reps as possible at a given weight or seeing what the heaviest weight that you can lift for a single rep is. Those are pretty tried and true strength tests that you can use to measure just how much your abilities are changing. And if, it's something where, you could do, 135 for one rep this month and you could do 145 for one rep next month, then obviously that's a pretty objective, pretty easy to measure way of, seeing how your strength has changed. Now, at the same time, there can be a lot of ways where, maybe, stuff that's a little bit harder to kind of, measure out. So, for example, in a general sense, you can kind of tell if your strength is improving based on how much volume you can tolerate. So if, for example, it used to be that 1 month you're able to do, say, 3 sets of 8 with 100 pounds, and now you could do 3 sets of 10 with 100 pounds, you could definitely tell that you are getting better. You've definitely improved in some way because you can do more reps per set without tiring out. That can get a little bit more confusing if you're talking about something like, okay, like I could do X amount of reps with 100 pounds, but I could do Y amount of reps with 120 pounds. What's the comparison? It can be a little bit harder. You can plug that into a 1 rep max calculator and get a sense of kind of how those numbers compare. But, it can be a little bit harder to kind of just, measure that and kind of get a good sense of, objectively what the number is there. However, this is also just a reason that I recommend that you track what you're doing in your training pretty consistently. One of the most important things that you can do when it comes to your training is actually tracking your training, because then, from week to week, you can say, okay, here's what I did last week. I will do a little bit better this week and build up from there. But it also gives you something where you can look back at your past records. You can say, here's what I could do 1 month ago. Here's what I could do 3 months ago. Here's what I could do 6 months ago. You can get a sense of, historically, looking back, what you could tolerate in the past and how that has changed relative to now. So obviously, if you can handle a lot more volume now, if you can handle a lot more weight, then you've gotten better. You don't need to quibble about exact numbers. You have been improving, and that's what matters. The fact that you are improving is what matters. It doesn't matter, you don't need any specific number. You just need to be sure that you are moving in the right direction. That is more important than anything else. One important thing here is that it is very easy to get confused when it comes to relative versus absolute changes. So what tends to happen when you build strength is that there are relative changes, which is to say that you are building strength relative to how much strength you had in a movement to start off with. So, for example, let's say you have a bench press. You can handle, say, 100 pounds. you go up to 150 pounds, right? That is a 50-pound absolute change, but it is a 50% relative change. You've added 50% to that lift. So now we're going to talk about, say, a really small movement. Let's say a lateral raise. This is a movement that starts out very weak. You cannot handle a lot of weight with it. Let's say you could only handle 10 pounds. So let's say that you've got 10-pound dumbbells at the gym and you got 15-pound dumbbells at the gym. Now let's say that you try and jump up from 10 pounds to 15 pounds and suddenly it's incredibly hard, right? Because, it's a small movement. You have added 50% to that movement in a single jump. Now just imagine, you're doing the bench press, you can handle 100 pounds. You're just like, okay, I can handle 100 pounds. Next, I'm going to try 150 pounds. Does that make any sense? No, not really. It doesn't, because that is a huge relative jump. And so what can tend to happen is that when you are starting out with a weak movement that starts out with a very light amount of weight, you don't really realize that those relative jumps are a lot bigger, even when you're talking about relatively small absolute jumps. So a 5-pound jump means almost nothing when you're talking about a 100-pound bench press. That is a 5% relative jump. When you're talking about a 10-pound lateral raise, that is a 50% jump. It is massive. And so people tend to get discouraged when handling those smaller movements that progress a lot more slowly because they don't really recognize the difference, and they kind of rush things, or they don't quite understand how big of a relative jump that is, and so they get frustrated when they can handle 10 pounds really easily but they can't handle 15 pounds or whatever the case is. And so of course it's something where it can help to get some intermediate weights if possible, if you can find 12.5-pound dumbbells. Not every gym has them. Or you may just need to spend a lot more time practicing with 10 pounds, for a long period of time, adding more and more reps, until you can finally be able to jump up in weight and handle the 15-pound dumbbells. So that is something where it can be very frustrating, in particular, because people don't realize, again, just how much of a difference that is. And people would kill to put 50 pounds in their bench press. I know powerlifters, you take a powerlifter who can handle, 600 pounds on a bench press, they would murder people to be able to put 50% on their bench press relatively quickly, right? Because that just doesn't happen. Things happen in relative percentages, and they happen over long periods of time. It takes, quite a long time just to even put, say, 1% on a movement. And so because those changes are so small when you're talking about lifts that start out very light, obviously you shouldn't expect to see results very quickly with those lifts. You should expect that it's going to take a while. You're going to have to do a lot of endurance stuff and so on. And of course, another major trap that folks fall into when it comes to strength is thinking only about their 1-rep max, or thinking only about those numbers, when again, there are many other ways that you can measure your strength. So obviously it might be something where you test your 1-rep max 1 month, and then you test it the next month and it's the same. And then, you're kind of like, oh, I didn't progress this month. But if you actually look at your training, you did a lot more volume, you're able to handle more, you're able to tolerate more. So the reality is that yes, you were improving. It just, isn't quite shown out in the 1-rep maxes yet. And that's the thing, yet. It may take a few months to crystallize. It may take some time. It may be that you just had a bad week when you went to take your test. Whatever the case is, the thing is that so long as your training volume is improving, so long as you're doing more training, that training is feeling good, and that training is well structured, you're going to be improving whether or not it really reflects it in the test every single month or every single week, or however often you test things. You shouldn't test things too regularly, because then people get obsessed with testing, and that becomes a drawback as well. So I just say, so again, so long as you're progressing, so long as you're moving in the right direction, that is the most important thing. Don't worry too much about the specific number there. So long as you are training hard, so long as you are actually, seeing your volume improving in your training, then yeah, that's what matters. So what if you are somebody who basically, is not trying to be the best powerlifter in the world, is not trying to be a bodybuilder, something like that? What if you're just somebody who's training for general health, general strength, general wellness? One thing that is intensely overlooked is just basically seeing improvements in terms of your quality of everyday living, in terms of just being able to do more things than you could do before. So I cannot tell you how many times, I've worked with clients and they come back to me in a few months and they say, I really wasn't seeing results, or wasn't really I wasn't really thinking that I was seeing results, but then, maybe I had to move house, or maybe I had some kind of unexpected physical task, or, maybe I, went out for a hike with my friends, or whatever the case is, and I realized I could handle it so much better than I could, just a few months previously, and that's because of the training. Yes, that is what happens. You are able to tolerate a lot more, you're going to be a lot stronger, you're going to be a lot more durable from training. That is just a normal thing that happens, and sometimes it takes, sort of an unexpected life stressor, or, a level of activity that you're not used to really be able to see that. So a story that I tell folks all the time is that I had a pair of clients, they were a pair of elderly clients, and basically it gotten to the point where neither of them were really capable of getting up and down the stairs in their house in a timely fashion. They could still do it, it just took long enough, they had to take a lot of breaks and so on, that they just decided it wasn't worth it. And so they basically just never went upstairs in their house anymore. They just wrote off the entire upper half of their house. They said, okay, when the kids come visit, they can stay upstairs or whatever the case is, but they literally never went upstairs in their own house. And then they started training with me, they built some strength, they, I had them do a lot of step ups and things like that. And, they come back to me within a couple months and they say, oh my God, we can get up the stairs in our house again. We can actually get upstairs and do things upstairs. And now we have the whole second half of our house that we couldn't, get to before. That is a clear-cut example of just, a really awesome progress metric that you can use where, again, it's a bit more nebulous. It's not something that you can measure with a specific number, but that is so emotionally impactful because it means you can actually do things in your life that you could not do before. And that is intensely empowering. That is so fun. That is, really what I live for, is being able to make that kind of change in a person's life. Especially as we get older, it is a lot less about, being jacked. It's not so much about being strong. It's not about showing off for Instagram or TikTok or YouTube or your friends or whatever. As you get older, it is more and more about just being capable of, thriving in your body, having a nice life, enjoying yourself, being able to do all the kinds of stuff you want to do without finding that your body is holding you back. That is a huge part of the reason why I am so positive about training and lifting weights, and why it has been so important to me is because it has helped me to sort of have, the abilities that I would like to be able to have to sort of enjoy my life and so on. And that is something that can help other people as well. So I hope you liked this week's video. As always, don't hesitate to smash that like button, subscribe, tell me what you want to see in future videos, give me some feedback down below, tell me, that you hate my hair this week or whatever the case is. I will talk to you all next week. Have a good one.